You might have seen one of these before. It's called a studio camera and it shoots 4x5 film. It has a lot of movements, and that's kind of what I want to talk about in this video. So how does this camera relate to the EOS R? Sucking, I'll tell you. Well, this is a tilt shift lens. These were developed to mimic the effects that were produced by the studio camera, but for smaller format cameras. The history isn't super important, but these cameras are predominantly for architectural photography or product photography where you want to control the perspective, or for shooting landscapes or macro shots where you need to control the depth of field. You need to expand that depth of field all the way out. Back to the EOS R, how does this in any way relate to talking about how this camera has some serious weaknesses? Let's talk about adapting lenses. I don't have any RF lenses, which is the native mount for this camera. And as amazing as the 15-35 f2.8 with image stabilization looks, I'm probably not going to be getting any RF lenses anytime soon. The fact that they don't work on the C100 or any of the other cinema cameras that I might be renting or purchasing in the future, yeah, that's not great. And so this means I'm left using adapters, and that's something I thought I'd given up on. I used to own the Sony A7R, that's the first one. The autofocus was pretty rough, and so the fact that I was using dumb adapters that didn't pass through any autofocus information into a third-party lens didn't really bother me, because I was able to manual focus. That camera had some really good functions built in that allowed you to focus manually with a good deal of confidence and some ease. But then I got the A6300, and the autofocus in that is pretty good. And I only had 2 native lenses, and that didn't cover everything I needed. And I got a little bit tired of just manually focusing. So I got some adapters that passed through autofocus data, and that was an exercise in frustration. It just never worked right. The focus was never quick, it was never good. It never felt responsive enough for me to use with confidence. Also with lenses like the EFS lenses from Canon, the STM ones, they just flat out didn't work, and that was a mess. It was a mess. So the adapter situation got pretty tiring, and I thought that I would be done with that. But then I ended up using the C100, and I really love that camera for some of the stuff that I do. I got a couple of Canon lenses, and so I thought, let's have a look at what Canon's offering now. And that's when this camera came about. The fact that the EOS R came with a native adapter in the box, made by Canon, designed to work with their systems, that gave me a little bit of confidence. And then I went and rented one before I bought it, and it was great. I really loved it. I actually had the adapter that has the control ring, and that was fantastic. And I know they've got another adapter out now that you can drop filters in. That looks great as well. I like that they are adding functionality with these adapters. And that kind of makes me think that they weren't that fussed on selling RF lenses with this camera. This camera seems to be an EF mount camera that just happens to have a removable mount. The lenses, when using this adapter, function flawlessly. They function exactly the same as when I've used a 5D with native lenses. So what I'm trying to say is the fact that you have to use an adapter and you don't have a huge native lens lineup for it isn't necessarily a problem. Like I say, I think they designed this camera with the adapters in mind, and that's why they've added functionality to them. And I really do hope that they continue to add functionality to them, because I think they could do some really amazing stuff. This isn't the fuck up of the third-party adapter that you're using to try and put Canon lenses onto your Sony. This isn't like that. This, if you haven't used it and you're slagging it off, I recommend you try it first, because as I say, it's pretty spot on. And the fact that this camera is almost natively EF means that you've got access to all these lenses from Canon, some of which are the TS lenses, the tilt shift lenses, the ones that you use to control perspective and depth of field. And these lenses can be really fun to use. Even if you don't know how to use them, you can get some really interesting effects. But when put into the hands of someone who knows what they're doing with them, they are an incredibly powerful tool to getting images correct in camera. For me, that means architectural stuff, so that means using the shift function, not necessarily the tilt. That being said, when I got the A7R, I really thought that the fact that the megapixel count was so high and software is so good, I could just do all of this in post, and these lenses were pretty much dead in the water, which is good because Sony don't have a tilt shift lineup. But having done that for a while, I've definitely seen that there's a lot to be said for getting it completely right in camera with specialist lenses. Me and my friend were working together on a job, and it was going to be a lot of architectural interiors and some exteriors, and I just kind of knew that it was going to be better to use a tilt shift lens. So we rented one. We rented the 17mm tilt shift from Canon. We shot the day with it, and then I was tasked with returning it the next day, so I had a couple of hours to play with it. And I thought, let's take it out and play with some video on it, because it very well could be a bit of a game changer with video. If you think about it, video is kind of like working with compressed images, so any playing about you do with it is going to show up more. You're dealing with between 2 and 8.3 megapixel images, so that's full HD to 4K. You don't really want to be messing around too much, distorting that in post-production, because any loss in resolution is going to degrade your image pretty quickly. It's not going to look great. And yeah, I get it. This is a very niche topic. It's a very specialist subject. Tilt shift photography is pretty specialist in itself, but then tilt shift video, even more so. So is a tilt shift lens practical for video? Well, kind of depends what kind of video you're doing. This kind of video, probably not. Because, well, why would it be? But I do a lot of stuff with interiors and architecture, so actually maybe it does make sense. I do have to say though, there are some downsides to these lenses. They're pretty expensive, especially considering the fact that you're going to have to buy a couple of different focal lengths, ones that you probably already own in other forms. So if you think about it, the two most common tilt shift lenses that you tend to see are the 17mm and the 24mm. Both focal lengths I have wrapped up neatly in my 16 to 35, so I already own them. They're also manual focus, they're not particularly well weather sealed, and they're for the most part really slow lenses. And as soon as you push them beyond their limits, they start to make stuff look really weird, and they really are only for their specific purposes. You're not gonna replace your 24mm with one of these, so I'm really not sure where Canon were aiming when they released the full frame mirrorless cameras that they brought out, because I don't see where the RF mount lenses fit in with the overall lineup from Canon. Are they going to be releasing tilt shift lenses in the RF mount? Are they going to be releasing cinema line cameras with an RF mount so you can use these lenses across those as well? Or are they going to be sticking to EF? I kind of hope they're going to stick to EF, because in the cinema cameras, one of the things you have, which is great, is you have those built-in ND filters, which are a lifesaver. And with the RF mount, you just wouldn't have enough room between the sensor and the lens to fit those in still, I don't think anyway. I'm not an engineer. What would be really great is if Canon focused on the fact that these cameras need adapting when using the EF lenses, and maybe there's some way that they could start to put in some sort of tilt shift functionality that would work with every lens. And yeah, that's not going to work particularly well, because the full frame lenses are only designed to cover a full frame sensor, so as soon as you start moving that image circle around, you're going to be sort of getting vignetting and you're going to be losing parts of the sensor. So it's not a great idea, but maybe there is something in it. Maybe they release some sort of RF adapter that has tilt shift functionality that maybe works with specific lenses that they bring out. So maybe you get a set, you get a wide, a medium and a telephoto, and they work with like the adapter, and so you only have to buy one mechanism, but you can then switch out the lenses in front of that, and they just would have to have a bigger throw. I don't know. That's all just brainstorming. I think it's just an interesting space, and I think it's interesting to look at the weaknesses of this camera as strengths, and that's what I'm trying to do with this, you know, multi-part series about how this camera sucks, because people keep telling me it's shit, and I'm yet to see it be particularly shit. I'm pretty happy with it. I think I may be the only person who likes the multi-function touch bar. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe someone else likes it. Maybe I should let you guys know how I set it up so that it's useful. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Feel free to tell me that I'm an idiot for buying this camera, that I should have waited and bought the next version of it. You do know that if I'd waited though, I wouldn't have had a camera at all, basically. And I wouldn't have been able to get any work done. So, you know, I needed it. And let me know if you've had any good experiences with this camera, because me and my friend Anthony, I'll link his channel just here, we were talking about how actually we've seen a lot of people backpedaling on the things that they've said about it, and actually maybe it's better than they thought, or maybe as Anthony was saying, we are just seeing Canon paying people to shill it out and say that it's better than it is. I am not paid by Canon, obviously, and I kind of hope other people aren't, you know, in that kind of secretive way. That being said, I'm going to continue this series about how this camera sucks, and I'm going to continue it with the crop in 4K, which you're actually watching now. So tell me what you think about this. Not my face, this setup. Right, that's it. Take care, and I'll see you next time. I know, it's too far away to do that thing. Bye.
Tabletop position, just flip the toes the other way around, tap the feet out. And then from here we're going to bring ourselves into a down facing dog. So the hands become a little bit further.
Another photo shoot in the car park.